How dare! Don't you respect our family tradition? Sorry, Father, but I can't.
So, a ceasefire agreement was reached for the time being. Whatever might happen, after 3 months, we were at least able to avoid the imminent all-out war that had been hanging in the air right before our eyes. However, this was a peace with a time limit, so tension always hung over the house. Whenever Father ran into me, he would apply pressure, both tangible and intangible. At that time, our house was an old hanok, so the bathroom was attached next to the front gate. If we happened to run into each other in the morning on the way to and from the bathroom, Father would hold his waist with one hand and hold up 3 fingers with the other, threatening,
"Hey, the 3 months are almost up."
A couple of months flew by quickly, and the promised 3 months were approaching. Quite strangely, the conversion did happen as I had promised Father, but the person who converted wasn't my wife. It was me. After promising Father that I would change my wife's mind, a change occurred in me that even I couldn't understand. Until that time, I had been so absorbed in newlywed bliss that as soon as I got off work, I would rush straight home. And my greatest pleasure was alternately looking at the faces of my daughter, so young, and my wife. But before I knew it, the existence called family began to grow stale. On the other hand, I began to frequently hang out with colleagues from work with whom I hadn't been very close. As time spent playing with peers of my age outside the fence of home increased, drinking gatherings became frequent, and each time a Huatu card game would naturally unfold. What started as a joke at first grew bigger day by day, and my colleagues' faces hardened with competitive spirit. Though I had no particular experience with card games such as Go Stop, once I learned it, I couldn't shake off that thrilling fun. Like a thief who learned late doesn't know the night is passing, I haunted Huatu card tables day and night regardless of time. When Go Stop became boring, the Huatu games naturally escalated into gambling. I mastered all the gambling games that could be played with Huatu cards. My wife didn't suspect at all the various false excuses of her husband, who came home after sleeping at gambling tables 4 or 5 days a week. Excuses like someone's funeral, first birthday party, housewarming, company dinner followed dazzlingly. One day, while living like this, when I came to my senses, I saw that debt had piled up like a mountain. I had lost all the money I had, and my debt alone exceeded 5 million won, like $5,000. And among it was quite a lot of public funds. If I couldn't fill that money back in, a big problem was obviously going to occur, so I ran around trying to raise it somehow. However, I had already reached out to all the places where I could get money, so there was nowhere left to borrow from. The date kept approaching relentlessly, and the money wasn't ready, and I kept licking my parched lips with my bitterly stinging tongue. Unable to endure it any longer, I decided to confess everything to my wife. It was a calculation that since my wife's family was well off, my wife would mobilize emergency relief funds. Finally, sitting alone with my wife, I cautiously brought up the topic. Scratching the back of my head and stuttering, I started as apologetically as possible. "Honey, I'm in really serious trouble. As things happened, I played Huatu as a joke with friends, and I ended up with a lot of debt." My wife just stared at me like a mute who had eaten honey. My voice crawled in like a mosquito's buzz from embarrassment. "There's quite a lot of public funds involved too. If I can't pay it back, it'll be a disaster." At this point, she should have cried out, "Oh my, I can't live," or "Does this man have any sense or not?" and cried and made a fuss. But it was so quiet that I actually got scared. When I slyly raised my eyes to steal a glance at my wife, amazingly, wasn't she smiling broadly? "So Young's father, if only you would return before God, what would that money matter? Don't worry, I'll somehow make it work." What kind of angelic words were these? First, I let out a sigh of relief at being saved, but the more I thought about it, the more amazing my wife's behavior seemed. Does everyone become like that if they believe in Jesus? Even with her secret savings account, it was insufficient to make 5 million won, so my wife eventually took off her necklace and opened the wardrobe to take out and sell all her wedding gifts without exception. Fortunately, with that money, I paid off the debt and got over the crisis for the time being. But after that day, I became the most pathetic husband in the world. Not only did I fail to give my wife jewelry from time to time, but I even made her sell all the accessories I had given her as wedding gifts. If it had been because of business difficulties, that might have been one thing, but the fact that it was because of gambling debt was a humiliation difficult to endure. I had to repay my debt to my wife by any means necessary. Otherwise, I would have to live my whole life with my nose strung by my wife, unable to raise my voice even once, and the future looked dark. But how could I repay this enormous debt? What would make my wife happiest? That's right, going to church. I realized that was my wife's most earnest wish. But wasn't I the eldest grandson of the head family? For someone like me to go to church didn't make sense. However, on the other hand, I consoled myself that going to church doesn't necessarily mean believing in Jesus, and isn't church a place you can go to even on Christmas or for dating purposes? I finally came to decide that if I could repay my debt by making my wife happy, I could certainly do that much. But exactly how long should I go to church? After thinking about it for several days, I made up my mind. Let's go exactly 10 times. It was my own ridiculous calculation method, deducting 500,000 won each time I went to church, so 10 times would fully repay the 5 million won debt. Several months flew by after I started going to church with this mindset of repaying my debt to my wife. The 3-month deadline I had promised my parents that I would either convert my wife to follow our family customs or carry out a divorce from my side had already passed, and instead I had started frequenting church, making the problem even more complicated. I was afraid of facing father. Not only did I feel guilty about betraying the family code as the eldest grandson and going in and out of church following my wife, but I also struggled because whenever father brought up the church issue, I couldn't find words to excuse myself. One day, after several months, father finally formally summoned me.
Hey, you said you'd convert your wife, but I hear you're going to the prayer hall too. You rascal, are you trying to die? What are you doing, asking to be struck by lightning before our ancestors? If the eldest grandson becomes a Jesus person, the whole clan will be turned upside down.
Before father, who was furiously pouring out scolding words, I laid out quite a plausible excuse. Father, please listen to me. I'm the eldest grandson, aren't I? So how could I become a Jesus person?
Then why are you going to church?
To convert my wife, I found that her Jesus-believing disease is unexpectedly deep. It's absolutely impossible with ordinary means. So I'm going to church myself to collect evidence of corruption and absurdity, then present it as proof before her and make her convert with no way out. Even I thought it was quite reasonable. Father also seemed convinced by my quick thinking and asked seriously,
Really? How was it when you went to church?
"Oh, Father, church is truly not a place to go. It's so complicated and disorderly, they just tell you to give money. I've secured considerable evidence now. I've just temporarily entered the tiger's den to catch the tiger, so don't worry too much." Father looking at me with a pleased expression. The smile of satisfaction that said, as expected, I have one solid eldest son was clear, but my heart constricted even more. If I had faith, I would have knelt before my parents with determination to die and cried out, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, then everyone will be saved." But since I was going in and out of church reluctantly, I didn't have even a hair's breadth of faith. My wife, whose faith had been discovered by my parents, began openly going to church from then on. Her attitude was, "Kill me if you're going to." My parents hated that my wife went to church, but they were convinced that before long, their proud eldest son would either convert her properly and make her bow deeply to our ancestral shrine again, or divorce her. They believed he would make a decisive choice between the two, so they pressed down and endured their boiling insides. However, exasperating situations continued one after another. On one of the constantly recurring ancestral rite days, Mother called my wife.
Daughter-in-law, today is great-great-grandmother's ancestral rite day. Go do the shopping.
Opening the door, my wife came out to the yard and answered,
Mother, I can no longer go shopping for offerings for idolatrous ancestral rites.
To Mother, this was like a bolt from the blue. To Mother, who had married into the head family as the eldest daughter-in-law at age 17 and lived her whole life under ancestral rites and the strict codes of the family, those words were the utmost rebellion and unfilial conduct.
Just now, what did you say?
Mother, from now on, even if you tell me to die, I can do even the pretense of dying, but I cannot touch even a fingertip to idol worship. Please forgive me.
Mother, who had been standing dumbfounded staring at this audacious daughter-in-law, sat down plop in the yard and began wailing loudly, beating the ground.
Neighbors, please listen to me. In the world, the wife of the head family's eldest son says she can't even go shopping for ancestral rites. Oh my.
Mother couldn't control her anger toward her daughter-in-law, along with the despair of the family tradition crumbling. Mother's shouting and nagging continued until evening, but the daughter-in-law just stayed locked in her room crying, remaining immovable. It was Mother's side that became frustrated first. Mother, carrying a shopping basket to buy ancestral rite groceries, couldn't quell her anger, and from a distance toward her daughter-in-law's room vented all the frustration she could. After returning from the market, she ordered her to prepare ancestral rite food, but the daughter-in-law still bowed her head and said,
Mother, I'm confident I can do everything else, but not ancestral rites. Please understand me.
No matter how much she appealed for understanding, it wasn't a matter that could be understood from my parents' values in the first place. The conflict intensified day by day, and the valley of anger deepened proportionally. When my wife gave spending money to my parents, she would always check the calendar and give it only after the ancestral rite day had passed. This was because she didn't want the money to be used even for buying ancestral rite food. Watching my wife like this, I had many thoughts. Where does such fearsome power come from in that woman who is the absolute obedience type? What is faith, really? But an even more dismaying thing began to happen. It had been quite several months since I had been going to church every Sunday, following my wife while making various excuses to avoid my parents' surveillance. Before I knew it, the day had approached when I should put an end to the 10 church attendances I had secretly promised myself. Today, church ends too. Since I went 10 times, I'll be freed from the human burden that weighed down on me every time I faced my wife. But that wasn't it. Rather, wasn't I feeling a strange sensation? What if there really is some God in church and he thinks it's outrageous that after coming well 10 times I suddenly cut off my visits and comes to harm me in the middle of the night? Wouldn't that just be my loss? Going to church following my wife doesn't mean believing in Jesus or betraying the family, so shouldn't I go a bit more? When my thoughts reached this point, my boldness grew even more. If this is how it is, why not make my wife a bit happier? And if by chance the God in church gives blessings, I'll receive that. And if our ancestors give blessings too, we can receive both together, right? It's better to have 2 insurance policies than 1. With this mindset, one day, while I was awkwardly going in and out of church, avoiding my parents' faces, I received a summons from Father. While discussing various family matters, Father stared straight at my face for a while, then asked with a worried expression,
Son, haven't you been in the tiger's den too long?
I was startled but answered as if composed, Yes, Father. It'll be done soon. Please wait just a little longer.
All right. I trust only you.
Cold sweat ran down my back as I left Father's room. Since this problem wasn't resolved, living together under one roof was nothing but hell. It was a chicken-hearted life of always being on edge and anxious. But an even bigger problem arose. One morning, just as I was leaving the front gate to go to work, Mother called me.
Son, today is Songdang grandmother's ancestral rite day, so come home early.
Yes, Mother. I understand. I answered reflexively, and took a few steps when suddenly a strange thought surged up from deep in my heart. Oh, I really don't want to perform ancestral rites. No. No. This thought, which I encountered for the first time in my life, was a thunderbolt to myself. It was something that could never happen. Wasn't I someone who had grown up in ancestral rite culture from childhood and lived firmly believing that ancestral rites were life's highest value? No matter what difficult situation arose, I kept the ancestral rite days like my life. Even when suffering from high fever with typhoid, I would crawl to participate in ancestral rites. To me, ancestral rites were more than faith. But that morning, for no reason at all, I suddenly felt I didn't want to perform ancestral rites. I, who had been going to work, couldn't overcome this shock and ended up standing still in front of the gate. No, what is this? Does it make sense for the eldest grandson to not want to perform ancestral rites? But still, I don't want to perform ancestral rites. Two minds began fighting fiercely, and this fight continued even on the commuter bus. After arriving at work and sitting down, work wouldn't come to hand. Why am I like this? What on earth is the reason? No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't figure out why. After agonizing with these two minds all morning, I finally gave the upper hand to the side that said, I don't want to perform ancestral rites. I checked who was on night duty that day and called home, saying I would substitute for them. Mother, I suddenly got assigned night duty today. I can't come for the ancestral rites.
Of all days, what's this on the ancestral rite day? Try switching with someone.
No matter how hard I tried, there's absolutely no one to switch with.
If that's really the case, it can't be helped.
That night in the duty room, I tossed and turned and spent the night with my eyes wide open. I truly had no face to show our ancestors. It was the same on the next ancestral rite day. I hated performing ancestral rites more than dying. On such days, I would deliberately gulp down bottles of soju at a store near home, then stagger home pretending to be drunk and make drunken excuses that it was force majeure. At such times, father would click his tongue and pour out scolding, the eldest grandson coming home drunk on an ancestral rite day, but there was nothing he could do. Looking at the eldest son who collapsed in his room spouting nonsense and the eldest daughter-in-law who was prepared to die rather than participate in ancestral rites, my parents must have truly felt their hearts breaking as the number of times I made excuses and didn't participate in ancestral rites increased. Father's gaze turned frighteningly harsh.
You. I see you've been bewitched by your wife and are betraying the family by going to the prayer hall. Before I strike you completely from the family register, quickly decide your attitude.
Mother couldn't just let it be either.
I didn't know you'd be like this. Even if the whole world changed, I believed you, son, wouldn't change. But how can this be? I can't show my face before our ancestors' shrine.
As my parents' anger and hurt toward me grew, the valley of worry and conflict only deepened. However, as days passed, I hated performing ancestral rites more than dying, and this was an unsolvable mystery to me, a homework that continuously tormented me until I met God at Cheongsong Detention Center and got a clear answer. The amazing answer about ancestral rites that I obtained and the story of my whole family's salvation are detailed in Volume 2 of this book. Caught between my parents and my wife, with religious conflict overlapping with the ancestral rite problem, I lost motivation in everything and my work life also withered. At that time, I worked in tax division of Daegu Junggu office, and it was a position with a guaranteed future in its own way. However, as days passed, going to work itself became lethargic, and the only thought circling day and night was, how do I escape this tedious situation? After various considerations, I concluded that the only way to overcome all the adverse conditions I was facing was to leave Daegu. From that day, I began meditating day and night on how can I escape my parents. Humanly thinking, it was absurd unfilial conduct, but my circumstances at that time were so desperate that I had no room to consider front or back. Then one day I saw a job posting in the newspaper for a grade 7 corrections officer recruitment exam. When I looked into it, corrections officers were truly nationwide civil servants who had to move to other places after working 2 to 3 years in one location. Since dozens of prisons, detention centers, and custody facilities were scattered throughout the country, it was a perfect match for the conditions I was looking for. I held a secret meeting with my wife. Honey, I want to change jobs. It seems I can't endure like this under father.
Where are you going to move to?
Well, corrections work.
Oh my! Prison guard? That's really good. If you can make even one prisoner into a new person there, that would truly be wonderful work. To me, that's much better than you being mayor or county chief.
My wife, who had also been living under mental pressure from my parents, was in high spirits with the expectation of being able to escape the head family, smiling brightly and holding my hand to encourage me.
There's not much time left until the exam, so study hard. I'll pray earnestly to our God.
Right, since I've already made up my mind once, shouldn't I see it through to the end?
Honey, read this once. It's the Bible, the book of Daniel.
Knowing that even though I had been going to church following her, I felt unnecessarily twisted about the terms they used like Holy Spirit, grace, etc. My wife cautiously opened the Bible book while watching my reaction. Though I wasn't particularly inclined to, thinking I should at least pretend to read for my wife's sincerity, I read along as my wife's fingertip pointed. Those who are wise shall shine, like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. Not yet realizing that God's hand was gradually intervening more deeply in my life. I was finally leaving my homeland, relatives, and father's house, charging toward the 15-foot walls I had never even thought of.